I wrote a new constitution for the United States. I did this because I believe that the current system that we have in this country allows for far too much corruption at both the federal and state levels of government, so much so that the average American is not in any way represented by their elected officials on either side of the aisle. And because I believe that as a country we have allowed for far too much power to be placed in the hands of whoever is president. Honestly, from my personal perspective, it seems like the only thing that American politicians ever even seem to care about are the corporations that donate millions of dollars to them every single campaign season. As it is, the average American makes less than $50,000 per year. The average price for a home in the United States is over $400,000. The cost for tuition is over $100,000. And the number one cause for bankruptcy in this country is medical debt. And all of those are just living expenses. That's not even to mention the fact that our infrastructure is literally crumbling. Our global influence is at an all-time historical low. Our national debt is over $37 trillion. The fact that we're forced into a two-party system when the majority of Americans hate or dislike at least one of, if not both parties. And now, as it is, we seem to be in a constitutional crisis every other day. And that's why I believe that we should implement a new system in this country, one that mitigates the effects of corruption and limits its reach. Don't get me wrong, I believe that the Constitution that was written in 1787 was a brilliant document. However, it's no longer the 1700s. As it is, our current Constitution was written by and for elite men, specifically so that way they could keep commoners out of power, and in many ways that is still in effect today. That's why outside of mitigating and limiting corruption in the United States, another one of the goals of this Constitution is to return power to the average American citizen. With that, hopefully we can have a better system that actually helps the average American and not simply the elite and those in power. Before I get started, I want to point out that the Constitution that I wrote is for everyone. Every American. Not simply those on the left, not simply those on the right. The Constitution I wrote is to promote the American values that we all share and cherish. Everything in this Constitution is made to empower the people. There are aspects to this Constitution that are left-leaning. There are aspects to this Constitution that are right-leaning. One of the main things that I was trying to go for in here was bipartisanship, and I hope that you can all understand that. So as I stated earlier, I believe that the largest problems that we have in this country have to do with the massive amount of corruption across the entire political sphere and the fact that we have handed over far too much power to the presidency. And a goal of mine was to give power back to the American people as opposed to concentrating it in the hands of the wealthy. So how do I think that we can fix these issues with a new constitution? Well, the first thing that we need to do is strip power away from Congress and give it back to the people. The second thing that we need to do is to break up the power of the presidency, as no one man should have that much authority. However, we have to do both of these while still maintaining a fair and equal system that does not marginalize against any group, specifically those in small rural towns and those in larger cities. So let's get started with where our current government does, that being Article 1. As we all know, Article 1 of the Constitution sets up the legislative branch of the United States, aka the Senate and the House of Representatives. And the job of both the Senate and the House of Representatives are to create and pass bills that will become law in the United States. If it weren't for the fact that the majority of politicians in both houses have been purchased by massive lobbyist PACs, I wouldn't have a problem with this. However, it is the reality of the situation that we live today. That's why I want to propose a new system, not only one that gives power back to the American people, but also helps mitigate the effects of corruption in the legislative branch. Every American deserves to have a say in the legislative branch of the United States, and I don't simply mean by electing a local loudmouth in order to represent you. I mean that we should all be able to vote on the legislation ourselves. That's why I propose getting rid of the House of Representatives and replacing it with what I like to call the Citizens Caucus. The Citizens Caucus would be a group of Americans that vote on bills proposed by the Senate. Americans all across the country would be able to vote on the bill themselves as opposed to having to rely on a local representative who may not even represent their values. Any American citizen can become a member of the Citizens Caucus if they so choose. However, in order to do so, they must pass 2 exams before they can. The first test being a proof of knowledge of the American Constitution, the second being of American history. Essentially, if you can prove that you're proficient in both those topics, then you can vote in the Citizens Caucus. It would also make bribery of the legislative branch of the United States nearly a thing of the past, as even if just 1% of American citizens became a member of the Citizens Caucus, that's already hundreds of thousands of members, and it's going to make it really difficult for anyone to try and bribe hundreds of thousands of people as opposed to a couple hundred. When it comes to the Citizens Caucus, they don't simply vote to pass or deny a bill that was given to them by the Senate. They can also propose legislation themselves, if popular enough, and on top of that, they can also vote to send the bill back to the Senate for renegotiation. Exams will be graded and judged by members of the Department of Education, and it shall be their sole occupation, though they may call upon assistance as needed from those with qualifications attributed to the subjects at hand. Now, I'm sure that many of you have some obvious questions and concerns about this process. Perhaps you're afraid that the average American isn't educated enough to vote on matters presented to Congress, such as bills for spending, energy, or defense. These are all valid concerns, and I will be addressing these all in the dedicated video to Article 1. However, for now, I would like to point out that the Constitution that I wrote is linked in the description, so if you want to actually read it and answer those questions yourselves, feel free. If not, I will be addressing them later. But for now, let's move on to Article 2. As I stated earlier, I believe that the President of the United States has far too much power, and there has been far too much overreach in the last 60 years. To a degree, I can understand the expansion of the executive power. One of the greatest things about executive authority is the ability to make quick and decisive actions. It helped presidents such as Roosevelt in World War II, Truman with the Civil Rights Act, and Lincoln with the Civil War. However, there are also massive problems with having so much executive authority, one such being Bush's wars in Iraq, another one being Biden pardoning his son, and then of course there's everything to do with Donald Trump right now. This begs the question, how do we ensure that executive power is not abused while also maintaining it as a force for good? For this, I don't have a solution. However, I do have a compromise with a system that's already being used today in Switzerland. Or at the very least, a system that's very similar to what the Swiss use. Instead of having a President of the United States, what we would have instead is a Council of Chiefs of Office. These Chiefs of Office would all hold equal power to each other while also maintaining executive authority. My proposal is to have a prime number of Chiefs of Office. That way, when they are voting on executive issues, there is no chance for there ever to be a tie. On top of this, I would suggest that we elect our Chiefs of Office on a regional basis as opposed to on a federal level. That way, every region can have their own representative in the executive office. I believe that this will help mitigate abuse of power in the executive authority. Along with that, I hope that it will help the United States come to far more compromises when it comes to both left and right-leaning issues. Now, I stated that there would be a prime number of Chiefs of Office. I also stated that they would be elected via regional elections. So I'm sure that many of you have the question, what are these regions and how do we actually elect them then? Well, I thought that the regions should be divided up based upon culture and natural resources. That's why I made up a quick map here for what my idea of what a general region could look like. Now, as opposed to the entire country electing a single president, what we would have instead is every single one of these regions elects their own chief of office. However, I don't necessarily know if simply 5 chiefs of office is that great of an idea, as they would all be running their own departments. I was thinking more along the lines of possibly 7 or even at most 13. So then the question remains, how would 5 regions elect 13 different chiefs of office? That doesn't make any sense. But it does if you consider it by population. As an example, let's say that we had 13 electable chiefs of office, and the US population is around 340 million people. So therefore, there would be 1 electable chief of office for every 26 million people. Now, if you look at those regions, according to my math here, the Northeast has around 58.8 million people. That would give them 2 electable chiefs of office. The South has 93.8 million people. That would give them 4 electable chiefs of office. The Midwest has 69.6 million people. That would give them 3 electable chiefs of office. The western half of the country has 61.6 million people. That would give them 2 electable chiefs. And then the West Coast has 53.8 million people. That would give them 2 chiefs of office. Now then, of course, how do you have 4 electable chiefs of office in one region? That cannot be done in our current system with the way we vote. However, if you implement a system such as star voting, then therefore you get simply the most popular candidates and not just one winner above all. That would allow us to elect 4 chiefs of office for one region, as opposed to 1 president throughout the entire country. Now, I'm also sure that many of you are curious what star voting is. Allow me to explain. In our current election system, we have a system that we call first past the post, meaning that anyone who gets a simple majority or whatever the rule set is for that area, they win the election, even if they only got 51% of the vote while the other candidate got 49%, therefore leaving 50% of the people unhappy with the vote. However, with a star voting system, what happens is you score candidates based upon your preferences on how much you like them. So say you wanted Bernie Sanders to be president as opposed to Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, well then you rank Bernie first, Hillary second, Trump last. Whereas if you wanted to vote for Ted Cruz, you could put Ted Cruz, Trump, Hillary, Bernie. So that way then you can essentially rank your preferences and see where it is they come out. Or you don't even have to rank them at all. But this system works very well if you have multiple candidates, say 13 or 12 or 11 or however many you want in an election. You don't have to have just two primary candidates win or lose situation. You can still elect multiple people based upon what preferences that you have. The only major change that I made to Article 3 of the Constitution is that instead of the Supreme Court being elected by the President and then approved by Congress, they would instead be elected in the same manner as chiefs of office would be. So instead of having to rely on the President or on the chiefs of office to have to pick our Supreme Court, we would choose them ourselves. Of course, when it comes to actually becoming a Supreme Court justice, they would need certain qualifications, but I will address those when I do a separate video on Article 3 itself. So those are all the major changes to the Constitution that I made, specifically our governmental system. There's a lot more smaller things I added inside the Constitution that I would love for you guys to look at, and I would love to make future videos on. As I said earlier, I will be making more videos specifically on the specific articles, such as Article 1, 2, 3, as well as other parts of the Constitution that I changed and wrote. If you guys would like to read those, please is linked in the description. I would love your feedback. Anything that you have to say, whether you think that what I said was garbage or whether you liked some parts of it and not others, fine with me. Just please let me know in the comment section below. Thanks.